Today's story is about Jack Unterweger, the killer who became a celebrity and kept killing. Vienna, May 23, 1990. Cameras flash in staccato bursts as Johann Jack Unterweger steps through the iron gate of Stein prison, a free man in a steel blue suit that fits like an apology. Reporters elbow for position, publishers wave contracts, cafe intellectuals applaud the miracle of rehabilitation. For 15 years they have quoted his prison autobiography Fegefeuer, Hellfire Turned Him, and now they hail him as living proof that art can tame violence. Jack removes his sunglasses, offers a dimpled grin, and tells the scrum he is ready to begin the second chapter. No one asks why he never talks about Chapter 1, the night he strangled teenager Margaret Schaefer with her own bra. The flashbulbs wipe that question from memory. Long before the applause, there was Judenberg, a soot-colored steel town tucked into the Styrian Alps. Jack was born there on August 16, 1950, to Theresia Unterweger, a barmaid with a petty crime record, and a vanished American soldier named Jack Becker. Mother in and out of jail, father nowhere, the boy spent toddlerhood wandering between welfare offices, foster cottages, and a one-room farmhouse ruled by an alcoholic grandfather who beat him with nettle branches. Jack later insisted the old man chained him to the stable beam like a goat. Official files note no such chain, only disciplinary measures. The blurring of truth and self-mythology will follow him for life, a survival trick sharpened before he could spell his own surname. By 16, he is stealing jewelry from hotel rooms, drifting through menial waiter jobs until each ends in another theft. Probation reports describe a handsome, manipulative youth who flirts for tips in the dining room by day and rifles suitcases by night. He graduates to pimping on Vienna's Gürtel, slashing one rival across the cheek with a pocket knife for encroaching on his girls. In 1971, he beats and assaults a German tourist hitchhiking through Tyrol, ties her with shoelaces, then claims amnesia when police corner him. A suicide attempt buys him psychiatric evaluation, but therapists deem him sane, merely devoid of remorse. He walks out with a prescription for social work supervision and immediately disappears into the border woods. The pattern is set: charm, violence, apology, vanish. Christmas Eve 1974, Unterweger flags down 18-year-old Margaret Schaefer on a lonely country road near Styria. He offers a ride, then a drink from a traveler's flask. Hours later, her body lies beneath fir branches, half naked, wrists bruised, a delicate bra strap knotted twice around her neck in an intricate double granny loop. Investigators photograph the knot because it looks deliberate, almost decorative. Weeks of dogged tracking pin the murder on Unterweger. At trial, he proclaims he was possessed by childhood trauma. The jury needs less than 2 hours to convict. The sentence is life without parole at Garston Prison. He will try suicide 3 times in the first year, each attempt more theatrical than lethal, as if refining for an audience he knows will arrive eventually. Inside Garston's stone walls, an inmate literature circle hands him a typewriter. Jack writes pulp memoir, purple poetry, and noir vignettes soaked in erotic regret. The prose is violent, yet oddly tender, and editors hungry for taboo publish everything. By 1985, Fegefeuer sells out 2 printings. Austrian Pen invites him to teleconference from his cell. Critics dub him the prison Rimbaud. Nobel laureate Günter Grass signs a petition calling him redeemed by language, and playwright Elfriede Jelinek tells the Ministry of Justice that keeping such talent locked up is cultural vandalism. Each article quoting Unterweger's syrupy reflections on guilt buries the detail that his victim was only 18. Words begin to outrun facts, and the prison board, flattered by literary celebrity, shelves its own psychiatric warnings. The rehabilitation campaign becomes a fashionable cause célèbre. Cafe owners host benefit readings, glossy magazines run photo spreads of Jack at his cell desk, rose in ink pot, like an existential pin-up. Ministers weigh the optics of mercy over permanence. On May 23, 1990, they decide the optics look good. Jack walks free, checks into the Imperial Hotel, and calls a press conference where he quotes Goethe before ordering champagne on the tab of a publisher already bidding for his next novel. A week later, he accepts a freelance assignment to report on the conditions of sex workers in Central Europe, a subject the editors believe he understands intimately. When a journalist asks how he will handle temptation, Unterweger laughs. "I have no fear of the night," he says, "because I know what waits there." What waits there, 3 months later, is the body of Blanka Bachkova, 30 years old, mother of a 7-year-old boy, part-time clerical butcher, who occasionally sells sex to cover rent. Passers-by find her near Prague's Vltava River on September 15, 1990, stockings tied around her throat in a familiar fastidious knot. Local detectives shrug. Street killings happen, but the press note the irony. An Austrian writer researching prostitution is in town. Jack gives a mournful interview about the city's unseen women, penning a column that reads like condolence. He leaves Prague before autopsy results even cool. Police archive the file with a question mark beside his name, unaware this is simply the opening stanza of a longer poem. October 1990, Graz. 41-year-old Brunhild Masser tells a friend she has a literary gentleman client and steps into Jack's red Mazda. Weeks pass before hunters discover her in a pine clearing, lingerie ligature knotted identically to Botchkova's. December brings the disappearance of Heidemari Hammerer from a taxi rank near Bregenz. Her frozen remains surface in Lake Constance months later, same knot. January 1991, Elfriede Schrempf, caring for an elderly mother but deep in debt, vanishes. Her body lies under brush outside Lischendorf. February claims 23-year-old art school dropout Sylvia Zagler in Vienna's Gürtel. March adds Sabine Moitzi, April, Regina Prem, May, Karen Eroglu Sladky. 7 Austrian women in 7 months, all sex workers, all strangled with their own undergarments, each not replicating Christmas 1974. The killer appears methodical, mobile, invisible. As corpses accumulate, Detective Superintendent Max Edelbacher builds a wall map connected by red yarn. Victim sites, motorway exits, cafes where a flamboyant ex-con signs books. He sees pattern where colleagues see coincidence. Surveillance teams tail Unterweger through Vienna's neon throat. Watch him interview streetwalkers for an ORF radio segment titled Fear on the Girdle. He quotes Sartre on the air, then slips into the passenger seat of an unmarked police car to offer his unique perspective on violence. The audacity stuns even the officers assigned to shadow him. Each night he passes checkpoints unsearched because nobody wants to hassle a media darling who dines with cabinet ministers. Edelbacher, short-tempered and chain-smoking, snaps that Austria is hosting a wolf in a dinner jacket. Yet the wolf continues to charm. He flirts with television hosts, rings talk radio to recite prison haikus, even teaches creative writing workshops at a juvenile detention center. His public readings pack smoky bars where students sip Gruner Veltliner and sigh over his gravelly voice. Whenever questions slide too close to his past, he pivots to social critique. If society sells bodies, he intones, why blame the poor for the transaction? Listeners applaud, believing they've just heard a prophet of empathy. Few recall a psychiatric report in his parole file warning of grandiose narcissistic traits and misogynistic fantasies. Jack keeps that report folded in his wallet, some say like an inside joke, next to a business card from Vienna's Homicide Bureau. Late spring 1991, Edelbacher phones the FBI's newly formed VCAP unit, convinced the knot is a signature. Analyst Greg McCrary agrees, a killer's autograph, he calls it during a transatlantic briefing. But Austrian brass balk at arresting their re-entry poster boy without DNA or eyewitnesses. They authorize covert tracking instead, hoping for a smoking gun that never quite materializes. Jack, gifted at reading tension, senses the net and schedules a trip to Los Angeles on a magazine commission comparing American and Austrian red light district. June 1991. Los Angeles smolders in summer heat and tension. The city is teetering on the edge, months away from the Rodney King riots. Crime is surging, homelessness spilling into the hills, and the sex trade flows through Hollywood Boulevard like an exposed vein. Into this storm steps Jack Unterweger, slick, tailored, and smiling behind a pair of gold-rimmed sunglasses. He's here, he says, to research prostitution in the United States for an Austrian magazine. He checks into the Cecil Hotel, infamous even then for suicides and unsolved deaths. When he signs the registry, he lists his occupation as journalist. He rents a white Mustang convertible with custom vanity plates. He cruises the streets at night with a young translator and photographer, posing with sex workers, taking notes, asking questions that seem benign to outsiders, until you realize they echo the thoughts of a predator scouting prey. But no one's alarmed. Jack has credentials. He tours the LAPD's Hollywood division. He interviews cops. He rides along on night patrols and gives a radio segment back in Austria on the decay of America's sex economy. He's introduced to Lieutenant Rick Jackson, who remembers being impressed by Jack's sincerity and eager demeanor. But Jackson would later say he was always asking how quickly patrols moved, how long they stayed on a beat. By the end of June, 3 women are dead. The first is Shannon Exley, 35, a Floridian with dreams of saving enough to return home. She's found June 20th, dumped near the Pomona Freeway. Her own bra used to strangle her. No signs of a fight, just fast surgical violence. 10 days later, Irene Rodriguez, 33, a mother of 4, vanishes. Her body is found behind a warehouse in Boyle Heights, a few blocks from where Jack had recently visited with a photographer. July 10th, a third woman, Peggy Jean Booth, also known as Sherry Ann Long, is found in a remote canyon off the Pacific Coast Highway. She was last seen alive near Hollywood and Vine. She had told another sex worker that she was meeting a guy from Europe who talked fancy. Her death mirrors the other two. Each murder has similarities. Women last seen near Hollywood, all working the street, all found strangled with their underwear. And though the press doesn't immediately link them, the knot, the precise granny knot, looped and reinforced, is noted by detectives. Still, it's Los Angeles in the 90s. These cases rarely receive attention, especially when the victims are marginalized. Back in Austria, Max Edelbacher is watching it all with growing dread. He's already linked Jack to 7 unsolved murders at home and 1 in Prague. Now halfway across the world, the same pattern is playing out again. Edelbacher reaches out to Interpol and contacts the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit at Quantico. FBI profiler Greg McCrary reviews the reports and immediately flags Jack as a likely serial offender. The knot itself, McCrary says, is like a fingerprint. Intricate, excessive, a signature of someone who takes pride in his control. McCrary, Edelbacher, and Austrian Lieutenant Ernst Geiger put the pieces together. Jack's travel logs, hotel receipts, and car rental timestamps match up almost perfectly with the time and location of each murder, both in Austria and now in California. The probability of this being coincidence? Practically zero. Still, the evidence remains circumstantial. There's no DNA, no fingerprints, and Jack is very careful not to leave anyone alive who could tie him directly to the crimes. As pressure builds, Jack leaves Los Angeles, but he's not going home. He knows authorities are circling, and by early 1992, he vanishes with his 18-year-old girlfriend, Bianca Marak. They travel across Europe under fake names, staying in modest pensions and using cash to avoid detection. Still, Jack can't resist the spotlight. He calls into radio stations. He sends letters to friends and journalists claiming he's being framed. He says, "The real killer must be laughing as you chase me." He frames his disappearance as a persecution, a witch hunt. Ironic, given how easily he's escaped scrutiny in the past. Interpol issues a red notice. Austrian authorities put out an arrest warrant for 9 counts of murder. The FBI adds Jack to their international wanted list. The break comes not from detectives, but from a mistake. Jack, unable to resist attention, or possibly desperate, calls an old friend to wire him money in Miami. The friend tips off authorities. On February 27, 1992, U.S. Marshals surround Jack outside a Western Union office. He runs, ditches Bianca, and tries to lose them in a parking garage. He's tackled, cuffed, and taken into custody. When officers check his belongings, they find poetry drafts, newspaper clippings about the murders, and a single pink ribbon tied in a familiar knot. He's held in Miami while Austrian prosecutors argue for extradition. Jack pleads not to be returned, claiming he won't survive prison. His lawyers argue he's being targeted by a moralistic crusade. But the U.S. Justice Department doesn't buy it. By May 27, 1992, Jack is flown back to Austria under heavy guard. The public reaction is explosive. The same media that once lauded him now crucifies him. Headlines call him the Austrian Jack the Ripper. Bookstores quietly pull his work. Publishers deny knowledge of his background, despite having campaigned for his early release. Former supporters try to distance themselves, though some admit they were seduced by his intellect. A popular columnist writes, "He killed with his hands, but we too gave him the rope." Meanwhile, prosecutors begin building one of the largest criminal cases in Austrian history. 11 murders. 3 countries. No physical evidence, only pattern, timeline, motive, and psychology. A media circus swirls around the Graz courthouse where the trial is set to begin in 1994. Jack's behavior is erratic. At first, he seems confident, even smug. He signs autographs for fans during recess. He wears sharp suits. He looks every bit the misunderstood intellectual. But behind the scenes, he is unraveling. His letters to Bianca grow obsessive. He begs her to stand by him, calling her his last sanctuary. She eventually stops responding. The trial begins on April 20th, 1994. The courtroom is packed with journalists, detectives, survivors' families, and curious citizens. The prosecution walks the jury through each case, presenting maps, timelines, and knot analyses. They play tapes of Jack's phone calls, including one in which he taunted the grieving husband of Regina Prem. They show photos of the crime scenes side by side, the knots, the locations, the methods, like a serial killer's scrapbook. The defense focuses on the lack of direct evidence. No blood, no DNA, no witnesses. They argue the prosecution's case is based on assumptions and media bias. Jack takes the stand, proclaiming his innocence with theatrical flair. "If I were a killer," he says, "do you think I'd be so foolish as to repeat myself?" He suggests the real murderer is mimicking his old crime to frame him. It's a bold claim, but it falls flat. Then comes the psychological analysis. Dr. Reinhard Haller, a prominent Austrian forensic psychiatrist, testifies for the state. He outlines Jack's diagnosis: narcissistic personality disorder with sadistic features. He explains how Jack's charm and eloquence serve as tools for manipulation, masking a deep disdain for women, especially sex workers. He describes a man who doesn't see his victims as people, but as metaphors, vessels through which he asserts control, dominance, and superiority. Haller also reviews Jack's writings from prison and compares them to known psychopathological profiles. He notes the use of grandiose language, the persistent self-pity, the obsessive focus on being misunderstood. He is not rehabilitated, Haller says. He is refined. This cuts through the courtroom like a razor. The man they thought had changed didn't change at all. He just learned to wear a better mask. On June 29, 1994, after 8 weeks of testimony, the jury returns its verdict: guilty on all 9 counts of murder. Jack receives a life sentence with no possibility of parole. For many, this is the long overdue end to a dangerous deception. But it isn't quite over yet. In the early hours of June 30th, just hours after the verdict, prison guards at Graz Karlau enter Jack's cell. He's hanging from the curtain rod, a shoelace and the drawstring from his tracksuit tied tightly around his neck, in the same precise knot he had used on his victims. He left no note, no apology, only the knot. According to Austrian law, because he died before his appeal was processed, his conviction was not legally finalized. His record remains incomplete, listed as deceased instead of guilty. A cruel irony, one last game played on the justice system. What follows is silence. The media slowly backs away. His books are pulled again, this time for good. But criminologists, profilers, and forensic psychologists continue to study his case. Not because of his writing, but because of his manipulation. Because of how thoroughly he fooled an entire nation. Because he proves that rehabilitation isn't a story someone tells you, it's something they show you. Over years, in patterns. And Jack Unterweger's pattern was unmistakable. From Judenberg to Los Angeles, from cell block to red carpet, he was never anything other than what he was at his core. A killer who dressed his cruelty in poetry. A murderer who chose his victims as metaphors. A man who found the perfect audience, then used it to hide the truth in plain sight. Among criminologists and psychologists, the case becomes required reading. Dr. Reinhard Haller, the psychiatrist who testified at the trial, publishes a paper warning against confusing charm with change. The FBI Behavioral Science Unit uses Jack's case in training materials as an example of manipulative narcissism and masking techniques employed by high-functioning psychopaths. The intricacy of his knots, the performative remorse, the charisma, these become data points for future investigations. In Austria, the justice system undergoes quiet but deliberate reform. More rigorous psychological evaluations are added to parole considerations. High-profile inmates are no longer granted public platforms without extensive review. The phrase "not another Unterweger" becomes shorthand for preventing rehabilitative theater from eclipsing forensic scrutiny. But there is no redemption in the retelling. For the families of victims like Brunhild Masser, Shannon Exley, Regina Prem, and the others, each new article or special report reopens wounds that never really healed. Their daughters and sisters were not characters in a crime saga. They were women, mothers, artists, daughters, students, killed not because they were weak, but because they were invisible. Jack simply used society's indifference as cover. Today, Jack Unterweger's name no longer symbolizes rehabilitation. It represents its failure, a case study in how performance can mimic sincerity, how intellect can camouflage cruelty, and how a society eager for redemption stories can become complicit in tragedy. In the end, Jack wasn't a mystery. He told us exactly who he was, just not in words, but in knots. And we didn't listen until it was far too late.